Hey, Tooth and Corners. Benjamin Franklin said that the only thing certain about life is death and taxes. And in this episode, I'm going to help you prepare for taxes. Did you really think it was going to be about death? We aren't to that level of the podcast yet to where I can start talking about those topics. So yeah, obviously we're talking about taxes today. And, most podcasts, they talk about how to save money in taxes with some type of maybe magic bullet or some secret strategy that, I don't know, ninjas came up with or something like that. But I thought that this episode, it'd be helpful just to have something to talk about, like how to get prepared for filing your taxes. Not how to be super strategic and do all these crazy things, but just getting your tax returns ready every year. It's something you got to do every single year for the rest of your life. And so there's just a lot that goes into that process. And I speak with dentists every single day who don't really know what to expect. So I thought, hey, let's do a podcast episode about it. In this episode, we're going to talk about what the CPA's expectations of you are going to be in this process, what your expectations should be of your CPA in this process, how to get ready for business tax returns, as well as how to get ready for personal tax returns. Those are the big pieces of the puzzle. So let's go ahead and address the elephant in the room. And that's a big misconception about getting taxes together. Now, I'm telling you this based off of almost 20 years of experience of doing taxes for people. And that is that in order for taxes to be done truly well, is that the taxpayer is paying the correct amount in taxes without any errors and the correct information is getting put into the returns, that it's nearly impossible for a good CPA firm or tax preparer to file that return without the help of the client. Now, our firm, we spend multiple six figures a year in technology to try and make this efficient as possible. But even then, we can't do it without the client's input. And the reason that is that there's just knowledge that you as the client have about your situation that is somewhat impossible for us to have an efficient means of getting that knowledge from your head into our work papers and into our setup. So even though we're communicating with you throughout the year, it's just more efficient just to ask you the right questions at tax time. Now, there's an old Chinese proverb that says, "He who asks a question is a fool for 5 minutes, but he who does not ask a question remains a fool forever." What do I mean by that? Well, there's going to be questions that you're going to get asked and you're going to be thinking well, this has no meaning or this has no bearing. The reason that we have to ask that question is because there's some kind of a standard or tax form that requires us to ask that question and get that answer in writing. These are questions such as, did you buy, sell, or hold any crypto this year? Do you have any assets in a foreign country? Did you file all of your 1099s, et cetera, et cetera? There's a bunch of them. And as a CPA, we will have some understanding of these questions based on your situation, but even if we know the answers, we actually have to ask regardless. And the reason is because there's specifically fines for the CPA firms if we don't ask those specific questions and at least get them in writing in some shape, form, or fashion. It's a big deal. And so we have to ask for professional guidance and ethics. Another story that's interesting is a conversation that I had with a client a few years ago. And it's something that as a CPA, I had no clue that people outside of the CPA industry were ignorant on. And that is that CPAs typically work long hours. Now, when I started in the industry, it was not uncommon for CPA firms to regularly admit to working 80 to 100 hours a week during tax season. And for the rest of the year, somewhere to 50 to 60 hours a week. So coworkers of mine would literally wear their number of hours spending time away from their family at work as a badge of pride. Thankfully, a lot has changed over the last 20 years. Now, there's a lot of firms out there that still go by those mottos and that still have that lack of work-life balance, but other firms do better with it. So you'll have happier people talking to you. But in terms of expectations of the CPAs to the clients, what this means is that you are still expected to respect that CPA firm's time. So what that means is you need to understand that if you wait too long to get your stuff in, that means you're going to have to wait in line with everybody else. So in terms of how those hours affect you, in terms of those long hours of work, there has been a shift in the work-life balance in CPA firms. So a lot of CPA firms on average don't work those 80 to 100 hours a week anymore. It may be more like 50 to 70 to 80, depending on the firm that you're working with. But regardless, whatever firm you're working with, those hours are going to be packed with work. And so again, that's the reason why you're going to have to wait in line if you wait to get your stuff in. It's almost always a first in, first out type of a deal in terms of information in, gets processed first, and then it gets taken out. as time goes on throughout the season, the wait between you submitting your information to getting your stuff back in will only get larger and larger of a gap, because there's just a lot of work that goes into getting tax returns done for clients that can't just be, shot through a system or technology thing to like spit out a tax return. We're not there yet. Believe us, we want to be there, but it's not there at this point in time. So another expectation that CPAs will have for clients, this one varies from CPA firm to CPA firm. And it's one that I would say every dentist needs to have a really good understanding of, because it's something that no one even talks about. And that is that each different CPA firm will fall in different areas of a spectrum in terms of the expectations of your level of knowledge for what you even submit to the CPA firm. On one end of the spectrum, firms will expect you to understand literally every single ramification and consequence for each question that you answer, each form that you submit, each number that you even give to them. Like, they expect you to understand exactly what you're giving to them and how that impacts your taxes. I have colleagues who, if they see a number on a piece of paper, they will put that number on the tax return almost regardless of what that number even may mean, because it came from the client. And you sign something every year for that tax firm to say, hey, the client is responsible for the information submitted, and that's going to go on the tax return. I've seen so many tax returns messed up because of this. So as an example of that, we had a client come in this year that they had multiple loans on a tax return because they told one person in the firm about this loan, but they didn't realize the person who was doing the cleanup on the accounting also got a note for that loan. So they'd submitted the information with the loan information in there. They'd forgotten they'd submitted the loan information. So they called the CPA to let them know. And the CPA then booked it again. So they double booked a loan and the asset acquisition for that loan. So they double booked an expense, and they didn't catch it for 2 years. And what they had to do is they had to go back and amend that, which led to the client owing back taxes of about $40,000 in addition to owing an extra maybe $10,000 to $20,000 in penalties and interest, because the client technically made the mistake. They told the person twice, they never caught it on the process, and sure enough, the engagement letter states that's their fault. And there are firms that will expect you to understand that. On the other side of the coin, we'll have clients that have came in and they didn't tell that CPA firm that they had a loan because they just didn't know to tell them they had a loan. It was a no interest loan for 18 months. They didn't make any payments. And so they didn't know they needed to tell the CPA firm. And the CPA firm didn't ask. They just took their stuff in, put it on the return, and went about their way. And so that caused them to not get their $250,000 deduction that they could have used that year, and basically eliminated almost $100,000 in taxes. It happens all the time. So the knowledge that you have where they fall on that spectrum is really important. So if you find yourself in a firm, and this is going to be hard to gauge, you may not know this until the interactions with this firm, but if you find someone on this end of the spectrum, you should be comfortable raising your hand and asking a question. And it's a fine expectation to have that they will walk you through what these questions mean, what the consequences of your answers are going to be. Some firms may not be great at answering this, since they may assume that you have the answers, and they may not be used to explaining it, but you should still feel comfortable raising your hand and asking the question. And it's a fine expectation to have of the CPA firm that they should answer it. I'd say personally on our firm that we're on the other end of the spectrum. We don't assume that you understand the implications of each question. So if we get a response that we aren't typically anticipating, we'll usually reach out to the client to help coach them through, like, hey, you said this, but usually what this means is ABC. And by the way, did you have any loans that were opened up for the year? Just as a double check, here's the ones that we have. Are there any other loans that you currently have? Because we know that you may not know to tell us all those things. So those are the two ends of the spectrum. I'd say that if the two ends are like, hey, you're expected to know everything, and the other end of the spectrum is, hey, we assume that you have a general understanding, but we're going to still walk you through it. Our firm is here on the spectrum. I guess you could also say there's probably like a farther end of the spectrum where they literally don't think you know anything. So we're closer on that end of the spectrum than the other in terms of how our firm operates. Oh, and I almost forgot, it's also an expectation to have your stuff in order as much as it possibly can be. So like as your stuff is coming in through January, February, March, make sure segment it out, keep it in a folder, keep it in an email inbox, get it set to the side, get it in a place where it can be sent over to your people in an efficient manner. Typically CPA firms are going to have different ways to intake that information that you give them. Some will have actual meetings that you'll sit down with somebody and they'll get a piece of paper out and they'll write down every piece of paper as you hand it over, doing an inventory of it, things like that. Other firms like ours, we use software to help make that process more asynchronous and efficient. That way, you don't have to go to a meeting. We have to be at the meeting as well. And we have to look at every piece of thing. And we say, hey, here are the 5 things that are left. You have to go find those things, come back, have another meeting, and take up a whole bunch of everybody's time. We just send you a list. You complete the list. If we have other requests, we add to the list as things go on and send you notifications of those things. So that's really another important expectation that the CPA should have of you. So the counter to that is, what are the expectations you should have the CPA? First, your CPA should be reaching out during tax season and asking questions, whether it be through organizers sending you that way to facilitate the process of getting documents. We're just asking questions in context of like tax planning items and things like that. Second, the CPA firm should be handling the heavy lifting on actually preparing the taxes. So at the same time, that's a shared responsibility that you shouldn't be expected to like calculate depreciation, write-offs, or apply really difficult tax pieces of the puzzle, but you may have to give your input on like, hey, do I want this tax benefit now or do I want it later? Because ultimately that's going to be your decision. It's going to be a client preference, and we really shouldn't be the ones telling you which one of those to do. We can give you suggestions, but we can't make you do those things. Now, we've had potential clients come through that have said like, hey, I want like white glove service, and everybody has a different definition of that. But we've had people actually come through like, no, I literally just don't want to do anything. I just want to like get a thing in my email inbox, click a button, taxes be done. And I want to pay you to do that. Down to the level they want us to open their mail for them and things like that. And while that level of service might exist, that's really not a reality in terms of like how the interaction between a CPA firm and a client works. If it did, if there are providers that are out there that do that, I would estimate they probably charge somewhere between 5 and 10 times what a typical CPA firm would charge. And there'd have to be like a really, really robust amount of sign-offs on liability so the CPA wouldn't get in trouble. And I don't even know if it'd be ethical if they could do that in certain ways, unless something was very, very specific in how it was set up. So anyways, that's an important caveat to that. A third expectation you should have is you shouldn't feel like when you send stuff out, it's just going out into a void. We've definitely heard horror stories from potential clients that have sent their stuff to a prior CPA firm. They sent it out in like February or March. They basically just had a folder of stuff. They sent it in an email and they just never heard anything back. So March rolls around, April rolls around, all the way up through September, October, and the client's reaching out saying, hey, what's going on? They're calling the office or leaving voicemails and no one ever gets back to them. They completely get ghosted. And these are for people that are paying monthly fees. We've heard this about. Now that's an extreme example, but it does happen. And so the expectation of like they should be communicating with you, even though it's a busy time of year, you should still expect some level of communication. Fourth, you should understand if you should be extending your tax returns or if you're going to have to make a payment at certain times and dates. So just as a reminder, an extension to file a tax return doesn't mean you get an extension to pay for that tax return. So your CPA firm should be communicating that to you and be helping you anticipate that. But another caveat to that is that you've got to give the CPA some preliminary information in order for them to be able to even calculate if you will need to pay prior to that due date or not. If you haven't sent them your information in, they can't do an accurate job of calculating if you would owe or if you didn't. And so that's one of those like kind of shared responsibility pieces of it. But if you send your stuff in a timely manner, if you're communicating with your CPA firm, they should be giving you some type of insights to what's coming up down the pipeline for those different pieces of the puzzle. For our firm, I'll also say we even have internal deadlines to say, hey, if it's not in by this date, then we're going to automatically extend you. That doesn't mean we're going to like leave you hanging in terms of figuring out what to pay, but we give those deadlines internally to our team members and to our clients. So there is a good understanding of like what the expectations are on those pieces of the puzzle as well. So let's talk about getting ready for your business tax return process. You're going to have to do this every year, but let's start with the due dates. So first of all, if you are an S Corp or you are a partnership, then you're going to have an 1120S for the S Corp and a 1065 for the partnership. And that's going to be due on March the 15th. On April the 15th, if you're a C Corp, you'll have an 1120 that is due on April the 15th. If you're a disregarded entity or something like that, you'd have a Schedule C that goes on your 1040 on April 15th as well. If you extend those two types of returns, the March 15th returns are due on September the 15th. The April 15th returns are due on October the 15th. And there are other types of forms and business entities and things like that, but that's 99.9% of the dental practices stuff that's out there. So what are you going to need? Number one, to file a good set of business returns, you're going to need to have a finalized balance sheet and a finalized profit and loss. You're going to need a general ledger so that there's a listing of all the transactions that created those financials. And sometimes you're going to have like a bookkeeper that will create those for you, that will send those over to the CPA. And then the CPA will do a once over on the report, specifically on the general ledger, and then make sure the balance sheet and profit and loss don't have any obvious issues. And then they should have some questions for you. Like I said earlier, questions are really important. If they didn't prepare the financial statements, they should have even more questions because they wouldn't be super intimately understanding the details of your situation. And so you're going to need to be prepared to answer those questions for your CPA. Also, you're going to want to have anything that is not reported directly on your financials ready to give to your CPA if it's related to your business. As an example to this, the most common piece I see missed is loans, because a lot of bookkeepers don't actually know the right way to use a balance sheet. I'm not saying all of them. I'm saying there's a significant number of them that don't put the loan correctly on the balance sheet. They don't book the asset on there. And that can lead to really, really, really large deductions getting missed because the CPA didn't know that the asset was purchased because there's no loan on the balance sheet. There's no asset on the balance sheet. And all they see is the payments come through and you miss a lot of opportunities there. I'll also say that your CPA should have a list of questions for your business. And this is in relation to like just certain disclosures and check boxes they're going to have to put on the return. There's things that they have to do on their end. So be prepared to answer those types of questions. Some of them will be relevant, some won't. They're likely going to ask you things like if there's any additional capital contributions you put into the business. They're going to have you confirm your list of distributions is correct, as well as they're going to have questions regarding the context of the reasons certain expenses have been paid. So one of the reasons that CPAs have to ask these questions and that you need to give the answers to the CPA is that CPA is not allowed to sign a tax return that have pieces on it that they don't know if they're reasonable or not. Reasonableness is the ethics guidance threshold we have to pass, and reasonableness is subjective, but generally we satisfy that requirement by asking about anything that we don't immediately connect the dots on for business use. It's almost never a gotcha moment. It's simply an ethics requirement, so you shouldn't be too worried about that piece of it. There's also going to be other questions that are things like, as an example, if you have health insurance that you're paying out of your business, there's certain ways to do that the right way, and there's certain ways to do that the wrong way. And so the CPA will likely ask you questions because sometimes on the books, they aren't put in there correctly, especially by bookkeeping companies, because they don't always know the proper tax treatment of it. They just know the bookkeeping way, which is not technically the tax way. So once those returns are completed, you should also be prepared to sign the returns once they're finished. Asking questions after the return is completed, but before you sign is perfectly acceptable if there's anything that you don't feel comfortable with or that you're not certain about what the return is saying to you, or if you don't necessarily maybe even agree with what's being said, or it just doesn't make sense. Perfectly acceptable. Don't shy away from it. You should ask those questions too prior to signing. Once you've signed, you send it back in and your business tax returns should be done. Okay, so the next step is we're going to talk about your personal taxes. Believe it or not, the business tax returns, while there's a lot of moving parts on business tax returns have a bit easier of a start to finish setup than individual tax returns do, because there are just so many little elements of personal tax returns. And most of the time, CPA firms, if they help you with your business stuff, will have a lot of your business information. So at Tooth and Coin, we do the financial statement preparation for all of our clients. So we know all the loans. We know all the things that we've got to validate. We know all the documents we need to look at. We know how to make it as accurate as possible so we don't miss anything. And so we don't have to ask as many questions. We definitely have to ask questions in order to do a good job, but we don't have to ask as many questions about the business tax stuff. You compare that to like the personal tax side of things. We may know your kids' names, but we may not know the school that they go to currently because maybe they switched schools, or maybe we don't know the name of the childcare provider, or we don't have access to all of your donations. We don't keep up with any of those things, so we don't have access to them. So we have to go out there and get them from you. And so since there's so many things that you might have to have, this kind of pulls back to when I talked about earlier in the conversation about expectations of the CPAs. Some CPA firms will just assume that you're going to give them everything. For us, we try to ask somewhat open-ended so that we can get that information from you so that you can then give us so you then know to give us the things you're supposed to give us, because there's a lot of things that could be happening. And so a lot of CPA firms use what's called an organizer to do this. There's a lot of different ways to do it, but generally speaking nowadays, the way it's called the organizer process. There's organizers, which is help you organize stuff. And then there's questionnaires, which is when we question you for things, just ask general update things. So things such as, did you have any kids this year? Because we may not know for certain if you stayed married, if you were divorced, if you moved, if you changed state lines, things like that. All those things should be coming out in the questionnaires. And again, some of those things you may have communicated to a CPA at some point in time, but we always have to double check. We always have to ask because of the fact that we don't house that information. That information comes from the client. And so every year, just to confirm, you should be getting those questionnaires to fill out. And they don't typically take a ton of time to answer those things. You should know most of those things off the cuff or find them very simply. And if you don't know the answers to those things, or you don't know how to answer those things, you should ask your CPA for guidance and help with how to answer it the right way. So you've got the questionnaire that the CPA firm will have for you. They'll have an organizer to send to you. And in that organizer, it'll ask for different types of documents. So as an example, it'll ask for likely any W-2s that you had. If your CPA firm helps you with your payroll or has access to your payroll software, then they can likely just pull those things for you. But that doesn't mean they won't ask to see if you had anything else, just as a precautionary method. Because believe me, we've had clients that we help handle the payroll, and lo and behold, we didn't realize that 2 months out of the year, the prior year, that doctor had a side gig helping somebody else and they got a W-2 for it. But if we wouldn't have asked for it, they would have never have said anything to us about it. So we always ask the question. So again, the theme of this episode is your CPA is going to ask you questions. And so they'll ask you for copies of those documents. You provide them to the CPA firm. Some CPA firms will have you physically bring those into them so they can make copies of them. Some people will have you send a fax in. Some people will have you scan it in and email it to them. Some people will have a secure portal to do it through. Some people will have like an online jot form thing. For our clients, they can usually take a picture with their phone and upload it to our thing, our organizer software that we've invested in. And so there's lots of different ways that you can facilitate this intake process for these documents, but that's generally how that's done. Now, there are times when things that come through your organizer that may not have been on there specifically because they may be very, very new. And if you've not told the CPA about it, it can be missed. So be very, very careful of that. So in terms of things that you can be prepared for to help with getting your personal tax returns ready by that original due date is make sure that if you have any K-1s, if you've made any investments in anything in the prior year, that you're communicating that to the CPA firm and you're letting them know that you have this and it needs to be in there before you file your returns. Now, there can be a whole lot of things that come through. You may be waiting on a charitable donation statement. You may be waiting on a K-1 from a partnership, from a real estate syndication that you did. You may be waiting on a 401k calculation on the business side of things. There's a bunch of things that could be waiting on, but that doesn't mean you shouldn't send your stuff in as timely as you can. Don't ever let just one small thing be the reason that you don't send your stuff in. And the reason for that is because of that original due date and extension date that we talked about. If you don't send any of your stuff in prior to the original due date, then the CPA firm kind of has to guess at how much they think you might owe so that you can make that payment on April 15th. Because remember, you don't get an extension to pay, you only get an extension to file. So if you ended up owing on April 15th, then that is due on April 15th. But if you didn't give them any of your stuff, then they're not going to be able to accurately predict how much you should or shouldn't have paid. And then you're going to be stuck in the extension game of waiting to make sure that number is right. And you may subject yourself to failure to file penalties. So be careful about that. Other things on the personal tax side of things, same rules apply for the business return. Reasonableness applies. So they may have some questions for you on that. They're going to have questions about like the crypto stuff, the foreign disclosure stuff. They may need a copy of your driver's license, believe it or not. There's a bunch of stuff that we may have to ask from you as a CPA firm to get your personal tax returns ready. So be prepared for that. Keep all of your stuff nice and neat. The way that we tell people to do it is monitor your emails. A lot of these places have like electronic delivery formats. A lot of these things, you're going to get stuff in the mail from various places. Put all that mail in one place in your house, in a folder somewhere, keep it safe, start getting it in a pile, getting it all together so that you can submit it in an efficient manner to your CPA whenever tax time gets here. And that's going to help you have as painless of a tax process as possible. Our internal goal for our clients is really not to have to spend maybe an hour to 4 hours a year on their side to get their tax returns done. So we want to send them questionnaires. We want to send them organizers. We want to have those things be as simple to fill out as possible, as well as them be prepared and understanding of how to fill those out prior to them getting them, if at all possible. Do we hit the mark at 100%? No, we don't. But we're always trying to be better and always trying to help clients get to that next level, because believe me, we know getting your tax returns done, it's a process every year for all of us. We spend all of our time during this time of year doing this for all of our clients. And we know it's a big to-do item for you guys. We want to be helpful. We want to get it done for you as well as we can. We want to maximize your tax savings, and we want to get that off of your to-do list as best as we possibly can. I know that this is like an odd episode because most people don't talk about like, what do you need to be ready for tax season? And there's likely other things that maybe I've skipped over or missed because there's just so many things that you can do to prepare for this. But if I were to summarize everything, the best things that you can do is, one, understand the expectations of your CPA as well as the reverse of that. So what the CPA is expecting of you, be responsive, be understanding that this is a time crunch for the service provider that you're helping with, that you're providing information to. Believe me, I get it. It's a service business. And so the service side of that, we have to have a client to offer that service to, but we also have a finite amount of time. And so time is the element that is there that we have to be able to maneuver around and be as efficient as possible with. And so be responsive and get your stuff in and put it into order. Be prepared to answer those questions and be prepared to also ask questions in a timely manner. If you have any questions about the process to your CPA, should be answering those things for you, or the process should be answering it for you as well. I hope that this helps you get through tax season a little bit better. Again, the biggest tip I can give you is if stuff comes in the mail, stuff comes through email that's related to your tax returns, most of them are on official forms. They'll say a tax document enclosed or something like that, or you'll have it through your email. Keep those in one place, save them down, file folder, put them in a folder on your email, do something with it so you have quick access to it whenever the CPA asks for those things. And so you'll be able to send them in an efficient manner. So hope this has been helpful, Tooth and Corners. I'll see you next time. Thanks for tuning in to the Tooth and Coin podcast. If you found value in today's episode, please share it with a fellow dentist or a practice owner who could benefit. Your word of mouth helps us spread financial wisdom throughout the dental community. So until next time, keep building that thriving practice.